It was a calm June morning off Haida Gwaii, the kind that tricks fishermen into believing the sea's gone soft. Daniel Arnaq pushed off from the wharf before sunrise, his deck neat nets folded, radio tuned to channel 16. Out here, order meant survival. By mid-morning, the fog rolled in, curling around his bow like smoke. When the others spotted his boat again just after 4 p.m., the engine still ran steady. The wheel turned on its own. No sign of Daniel. Not a splash, not a shout, not a struggle. Only his lines drifting loose, one torn clean down the center. They searched for days, found his glove, his float ring, nothing else. The sea gave back no body, no voice. And so, in the silence, rumors filled the gap. Debts, unpaid waters, trespassed, something old and angry waiting beneath the tide. 2 decades later, a storm uncovers a sealed chest tangled in a familiar torn net. Inside, something that shouldn't have been there. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from today. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. The morning began like any other in Masset Bay. A quiet stretch of gray water under a pale June sky. The tide lay low and slow, the gulls circling high and lazy. To anyone watching from the wharf, there was nothing unusual about Daniel Arnaq's small trawler easing away from the dock at 5 a.m. He moved like a man following ritual, hand-to-railing glance at the compass, touched the weathered wheel as though greeting an old friend. Out here, the sea kept memory better than men did. Daniel had fished these waters for over 20 years, long enough to know the moods of the current and the way fog gathered before noon. He worked alone most days, trusting his own rhythm. He was a man of few words, and the other fishermen, his neighbors, his rivals, his friends, called him dependable. Not lucky, never reckless. Just steady. That morning, the harbor radio logged his check-in at 5:12 a.m. Calm seas, visibility clear. Destination West Shoal, nothing remarkable. By mid-morning, the weather began to shift. A slow haze pulled across the horizon, the kind that slips in quietly and erases distance. From shore, the line where water met sky blurred into one. Boats called back over the open channel, voices faint and muffled. Most began to turn for home before noon. All except Daniel. At 4 p.m., another fisherman, Jonas Wren, working his last net before heading in, spotted something strange. A boat circling in slow loops, engine still running, wake rippling outward like a clock's second hand. Jonas called out once, twice. No reply. He drew closer, heart tightening. The name stenciled on the stern read, Marina's Gift. The wheel spun idly, the throttle engaged. No one stood at the helm. No boots on deck, no hand on rail. Just the hum of the motor and the smell of salt oil and sun-warmed rope. Jonas cut his engine and drifted alongside. The cabin door hung open. Inside, a thermos rolled with the motion half full. A logbook lay open on the table, last entry 10 a.m., a neat line reading set, nets at West Shoal. No sign of Daniel. No radio distress call. No torn railing, no splintered plank. Everything in order except for one thing. The main trawl net trailed over the side, snagged deep below. When Jonas leaned closer, he saw it had been ripped apart, a jagged gash running nearly the full length. The edges were uneven, some fibers frayed and others fresh, as if something had pulled hard, sudden. He radioed the Coast Guard station at Queen Charlotte. Within the hour, a SAR team was dispatched. They marked the coordinates, secured the boat, and began a search grid fanning out 3 nautical miles. Helicopters swept overhead, their blades cutting through fog that thickened by the minute. Divers went down, lights glinting like sparks under the waves. Nothing. By dusk, the only sounds were engines idling and radios hissing static. The search continued through the night, every vessel in the harbor joining in. Men who'd fished beside Daniel for years. Evan Cross, Reggie Harlow. Old Wren himself took turns scanning the dark, calling his name into the wind. They found nothing but drifting kelp and a stray glove. At 11 p.m., the Coast Guard logged the area as cleared. No debris, no sign of struggle, no trace of a man lost at sea. Only the boat engine still steady, as though waiting for its captain's return. Back at the dock, Marina Arnaq stood silent as they towed the vessel home. She did not cry, not then. She touched the railing once the same way her husband always did before leaving, and whispered something no one caught. In the following days, the investigation yielded little. Daniel's radio worked fine. His life vest was missing from the hook. The cabin held no damage, no overturned chair, no footprints but his. The tide chart for that day showed calm currents, no rip. Weather reports noted clear conditions through noon, then fog density increasing at 1 p.m. But one detail lingered in every report, the net torn down its center fibers, both aged and new. The Coast Guard officer who logged it wrote in his notes, "Edges uneven, cut or strain uncertain. Unusual combination of wear." In a village where every knot, rope, and hook carried a story, that torn net became a quiet obsession. Some said it was nothing an old tear reopened. Others whispered about submerged rock ridges, unseen hazards, or something larger moving beneath. For weeks, the boat sat moored near the fuel dock, salt drying along its hull. Fishermen passed it on their way out, glancing once, then looking away. The sea had taken men before, but never like this, clean, soundless, without a single witness. In time, the rumors began. That he'd fallen asleep and slipped, that he'd met someone on the water, that he'd crossed into a place he shouldn't have been. Yet for all the talk, none could explain the calm. No storm, no crash, no cry, just a boat circling slow, a torn net fluttering in the tide in the wide, unblinking sea. The Coast Guard closed the case as man overboard, presumed drowned. The file sat thin in a drawer. Time-stamped 1999. But those who'd known Daniel remembered the morning he left. The way he'd checked his compass twice. The quiet look on his face when he saw the fog curling low beyond the harbor mouth, as if he knew it was waiting for him. The boat kept circling empty beneath a sky without sound. The morning after Daniel's disappearance, the harbor was quieter than usual. Boats rocked in their slips hulls, creaking like old bones. Fog hung low over Masset Bay, thick and pearled swallowing sound. The men who gathered on the dock spoke, little eyes drawn toward the horizon where Marina's gift had been found. It was hard to believe a man could vanish in sight of his own crew. By 6 a.m., the search resumed. Volunteers from every corner of the inlet pushed out with grappling hooks, sonar gear, and quiet determination. They scoured coves and sandbars, followed tide charts by instinct and habit. These were fishermen, not detectives. Their search patterns were born from tide and current, not training manuals. Jonas Wren led one group toward the shoal where Daniel's nets had been set. He had fished those same coordinates for 30 years, and the place unsettled him now. The silence heavier, the water strangely still. When his deckhand hauled up a loose buoy at 8:45 a.m., they froze. It was Daniel's marker ring initials, DA, burned into the plastic rope snapped halfway through. Around its base, strands of frayed mesh clung like hair. They radioed the find. The Coast Guard logged it as recovered debris in Ma3. The first two had been a glove and a half-empty thermos. By noon, the tide shifted. Fog peeled away, revealing open water, flat, metallic, endless. Nothing moved but gulls. Back on shore, Marina stood at the pier beside her son, Lucas. 17 tall and wiry, he stared out toward the shoal as if he could will the sea to return his father. She kept one hand on his shoulder, fingers digging in whenever the radio crackled, but each report was the same, negative. As the hours passed, the stories began. Someone claimed they'd seen a whale breach near Daniel's last position, a dark shape cutting the surface. Another swore they'd heard a single shout over the fog, too faint to trace. And one older deckhand, half drunk with grief, muttered about the old line, the invisible boundary between safe water and cursed. Among the fishermen, these whispers took root fast. Haida Gwaii was a place of stories older than charts, and men here knew how easily the sea remembered what land forgot. Still, none could explain the message recorded that morning. SEA officers retrieved Daniel's VHF log and replayed it through a static wash. At 10:03 a.m., a faint transmission flickered across Channel 16, 3 words nearly lost in the hiss, wrong line, wrong. Then silence. No distress call followed, no coordinates, just that phrase repeating like an echo, fading into fog. The investigators listed it as inconclusive communication, possible interference. But to the men who knew Daniel, it sounded deliberate. Later that afternoon, Jonas returned with another discovery. A loose float tangled with shredded netting. The tear matched the damage on Marina's gift, a long rip running diagonally, one edge weathered, one edge fresh. He turned it over in his hands, the salt water dripping from the fibers, wondering what could pull a line apart so clean. By evening, the harbor felt hollow. Men sat in their cabins with lights off, radios silent, listening to the hum of engines anchored in still water. In a village, this small loss spread like tide, filling every room, every voice. At home, Marina set Daniel's mug on the table, steam rising from untouched tea. Lucas paced by the window. He wouldn't just fall, he said for the third time. He tied himself in, he always did. She didn't answer. Instead, she opened the drawer where he kept his spare maps, neat stacks, corners sharp. The chart for West Shoal was missing. Only a faint imprint of its outline remained. That night, Lucas walked the docks alone. The fog returned in patches, curling low across the surface. From somewhere offshore, a radio crackled, a ghost frequency bouncing through mist. He thought he heard his father's voice again, 3 words broken by static. But when he turned the dial, it vanished. By the third day, official search operations scaled back. The Coast Guard cited clear conditions, no evidence of foul play, no body recovered. Locals took over combing driftwood piles and tide lines. They found only fragments, a length of rope, a torn glove finger, a rusted hook bent into an impossible angle. Each item went into a labeled plastic bag. Each told them nothing. The torn net, now dry and stiff, hung from a nail near the fuel shed. Fishermen passing by slowed to look. Some said it was bad luck to keep it there, a reminder of what the sea takes. Others refused to touch it. In the evenings, men gathered at the tavern, speaking low. Jonas swore he'd seen another boat on the radar near Daniel's position that morning, a faint blip that vanished before he could hail it. Others dismissed it, blaming echo scatter from fog. Still, the rumor lingered, a second vessel unseen, unlogged. By week's end, Daniel's name joined the list. Few spoke aloud, the ones the sea had claimed. Yet his story felt different. Too clean, too quiet. Out on the breakwater, Lucas stood watching gulls dive. Beneath him, waves curled and folded, carrying small things, driftwood, foam, a single scrap of red mesh. He leaned closer. It was part of a fishing net, torn but familiar, its threads knotted into a shape that looked almost like a hand reaching up from below. The wind shifted, carrying the faint hum of an engine across the bay. No boat in sight, just the echo of something moving somewhere under the fog. From the radio came 3 words thin as breath: wrong line, wrong. By the end of that first week, Marina's gift had been hauled from the slip and dry docked beside the repair shed, hull streaked with salt and rust. Investigators combed the vessel from bow to stern, logging every item still aboard. Nothing suggested a struggle. The cabin was neat, gear stored properly, decks scrubbed clean. Even the coffee ring on the chart table looked deliberate, as though Daniel had paused mid-sip before stepping outside and vanishing into air. The lead officer, Sergeant Caleb Thorne, filed his initial summary. No evidence of foul play. Vessel sound. Possible man overboard. Presumed drowned. It was a phrase the fisherman hated, a bureaucratic end to a mystery that didn't feel finished. Among the crew who'd worked those waters, Daniel's habits were well known. He never stood at the edge without a harness. He wore gloves, boots, vest. He kept his radio within reach. The man was careful, cautious, even superstitious. He believed the sea took only those who disrespected it. That was why the others couldn't let go. From the start, they'd noticed something strange about the torn net. The cut wasn't jagged like rock damage, nor smooth like a knife. It was both. Some strands frayed and pale as if sun-rotted, others snapped clean, freshly strained. Caleb Thorne photographed the tear and sealed it in a clear bag for later analysis, though no one believed the lab in Prince Rupert would find much. Salt water erased things, prints, fibers, stories. Marina Arnaq sat in her kitchen as the officers questioned her. The curtains were drawn. The kettle hissed softly on the stove. She told them her husband had slept poorly the night before. He'd sat at the table long after she went to bed, tracing lines across his old sea charts. When she rose at dawn, he was already gone. Did he mention plans? Anyone he meant to meet. She shook her head. Only said he needed to check a mark. He didn't say which one. In the corner, Lucas leaned against the wall, arms folded. He'd been listening quietly, eyes fixed on the net sample laid across the counter, a strip of nylon stiff with salt edges curled like burnt paper. After the officers left, he said, "He never used that pattern. Those knots, they're not his." Marina frowned. "What do you mean?" "He tied double loops, not singles." "Look here." He pointed to the mesh. "That's someone else's rig." She didn't answer. But later, when he'd gone to bed, she took down the box of Daniel's old notebooks. Inside were pages of figures, depths, coordinates, tide cycles, and one sheet torn neatly from the middle. In its place, a faint outline remained pressed by his pencil. It looked like a triangle of the West Shoal circled twice. By midweek, whispers crept through the harbor. Some said Daniel had been poaching, crossing into a restricted fishing lane marked on charts since 1992. Others claimed he'd been chasing a rumor of deeper grounds waters that still held halibut where others came up empty. But among the Haida elders, the talk turned older still, the line that should not be crossed, a boundary of stories older than steel hulls and sonar maps. Jonas Wren met Lucas by the dock one evening, both men staring out at the tide. "Your father ever mentioned the red buoy?" he asked. Lucas shook his head. "No, I saw it once. Back in '83 when the north wind went under. Same spot. Nets came up shredded, same as his. The north wind sank, vanished. No wreck, no bodies, just a ring of floats spinning like a wheel. They said it was the current, but that day the sea was flat." Lucas watched the water, unsure if Jonas meant warning or confession. In this village, stories blurred fact and memory, braided tight like rope. The next day, Sergeant Thorne called Jonas to the station. They'd pulled radar logs from the Coast Guard tower. At 10 a.m., a faint secondary blip appeared on the screen, small, slow-moving, then gone within minutes. Its coordinates matched Marina's Gift's last position. "Could be interference," Thorne said. "Fog can split signals." "Or another boat," Jonas answered. "Any vessels unaccounted for, none registered." "Unofficial, then." Thorne said nothing. He printed the radar, still two pale dots side by side, dissolving into static. Back in town, Lucas stood before the dry, docked hull. He traced the place where the torn net had wrapped the propeller fingers, brushing against frayed nylon strands. Salt crystals gleamed like frost. In their glint, he imagined his father's hand, strong, calloused, slipping once before disappearing beneath a flat gray surface. At sunset, the harbor bell rang twice. Gulls wheeled low, crying over the empty moorings. Marina walked home alone past windows already shuttered. On the kitchen wall hung Daniel's photograph taken years ago, smiling beside a catch of halibut. She stared at it a long while, then turned it face down. That night, Lucas dreamed of a wheel turning in circles, water folding endlessly, a voice repeating through static wrong line. He woke before dawn, sweat cold on his neck, and heard the gulls outside screaming toward the shoal. On the drying rack, the torn net dripped red under morning light. By the second week, the air in Masset felt heavy with things unsaid. The Coast Guard had scaled back its presence, leaving behind reports forms and a silence that seemed to deepen each morning. The official story, accidental fall, body unrecovered, satisfied no one. Out here, when a man vanished, the sea gave back something, a boot, a cap, a scrap of cloth. This time, nothing. Only that net torn and salted stiff, hanging like a warning over the pier. At the harbor tavern, whispers circled faster than wind. Some spoke of Daniel's defiance, how he'd fished beyond the markers, others feared. Others said he'd angered someone closer to shore. There was talk of an argument weeks before down by the fuel pumps. No one remembered details, only raised voices and a sudden hush when the foreman stepped out. For Marina, the gossip gnawed slow but steady. She knew her husband had enemies not from malice, but from stubbornness. Daniel believed in the old ways, reading currents by feel, choosing grounds by instinct, not license. He distrusted the new fleet from Prince Rupert men with steel decks and digital sonar. They don't listen to the sea, he'd say. They just take. But lately, he'd grown uneasy. Some nights he returned later than usual, eyes shadowed, smelling of smoke and brine. Once, she'd asked what kept him out so long. He only said, "There's something wrong with the water." That phrase lingered now, echoing against every theory. On the fourth night, after the search ended, Lucas sat with old Jonas Wren in the boathouse lantern light flickering over charts spread across a crate. Jonas traced a finger along the west shoal. "Your father told me once this line here he tapped a faint pencil mark is older than any map. Said the elders used to warn against crossing it, not for depth or reef, but for what lies beneath." "You believe that?" Lucas asked. "I believe what I've seen. 2 boats lost here, same season, same moon. And both times the nets came up torn." Lucas stared at the circle his father had drawn, a narrow channel between ridges rarely fished now. "He called it the marked water," he said quietly. Jonas nodded. "He said he found something there. Something buried in the sand." The boy frowned. "Like what?" The old man shrugged. "Never told me. But he stopped setting lines near it, until now." That night back home, Lucas searched his father's workshop. Tools still lay where he'd left them, knives sharpened, ropes coiled, oilcloth folded neat. In a drawer beneath the bench, he found an empty slot, a missing chart, tube label torn off. Beside it lay a single scrap of paper, damp and curled with smudged handwriting, barely legible depth, 23 Stone Ridge wrong line. When he showed it to his mother, she went pale. "He promised he'd never go back there," she whispered. "Back where?" But she only shook her head. The next day, Marina visited the home of Elder Nas, keeper of village lore. His house sat high above the cove cedar beams carved with ravens and tides. She carried Daniel's glove found near the shoal, stiff now crusted with salt. "Tell me what this means," she said. The old man turned it over in his weathered hands. "Your husband forgot the stories," he said. "That place he fished at was once a burial ground for offerings. The old ones cast nets there only once a year during the fog moon. Never alone, never twice." Marina listened, heart tight. "He didn't believe in curses." Nas smiled faintly. "Belief is not required, only memory. The sea remembers enough for all of us." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the dry kelp hanging from the eaves. Marina looked out over the water. In the gray light, she could almost see Marina's gift turning slow circles again, empty and patient. That evening, Lucas visited Evan Cross, one of the younger fishermen who'd helped in the search. Evan sat mending nets by the fire, his hands moving quick and sure. "You saw him last, didn't you?" Lucas asked. Evan hesitated. "Night before he vanished, down by the dock. He was with someone I didn't know, a tall man. Dark coat, didn't speak. They were arguing about charts." "Did you hear what they said?" "Just a few words. Daniel said, 'It's not yours to mark.' Then he left." Lucas frowned. "You tell the police." Evan shook his head. "Didn't seem important then. Thought it was about fishing rights. But now..." He paused, eyes drifting toward the door. "There's more. Around 10 a.m. that morning, I saw a light through the fog, not from his boat. Another one, smaller. Didn't stay long." Later that night, Lucas returned to the docks. The fog had settled thick again, muffling the world to a few feet of shadow and glow. He walked to the end of the pier where the torn net hung to dry. Under the lamplight, its fibers shimmered with salt edges curling like singed fabric. He reached out, tracing one seam, and stopped. A thin thread of red ran through the weave, faint but visible, crusted dark at the edges. He rubbed it between his fingers. Sticky. By dawn, he carried this piece to Sergeant Thorne. The officer sealed it in a bag, labeling it Sample D6 Possible Organic Residue. They would send it to Prince Rupert for testing, though Thorne already suspected the result. Fish blood, perhaps. Still, something about the way Lucas described it unsettled him. He logged the chain of custody, paused over the description, and wrote a single note beside it. Found under lamplight. Origin uncertain. Back at the pier, the rest of the net hung limp water dripping from its frayed ends, salt crust blooming white across the knots. It moved slightly with the morning breeze as though tugged by a slow, invisible hand. Beneath the torn mesh, a single red drop refused to fade. By late June, the tides around Massey turned restless. Fog came earlier, thicker, rolling in with a damp chill that clung to nets and skin alike. Most fishermen avoided the west shoal, now steering wide, as if the sea itself bore a scar. But Lucas Arnaq refused to stay away. Something in that patch of water held his father's last breath, and he meant to find it. That morning he joined Jonas Wren aboard the Aurora, a small trawler fitted with an aging winch and sonar that clicked like bones in the hull. The plan was simple: sweep the coordinates Daniel had circled, drag a line, and pull up whatever the sea had chosen to hide. The fog lifted just after 9 a.m., revealing a surface like polished steel. Lucas stood at the bow, eyes locked on the depth gauge, 23 meters, matching the note from his father's drawer. Jonas throttled back. The engine idled, and the deck fell still. "Drop line," Jonas said. The weighted hook plunged rope humming through Lucas's hands. They dragged slow, the net yawning wide in the current. For nearly half an hour they hauled nothing but silt and kelp. Then the winch strained rope, snapping taut. "Feels snagged," Jonas muttered. They reversed engine, eased tension. The rope shuddered, then gave. As the net rose, shapes emerged through the green water. Not fish, not stone. When the haul broke surface, Lucas stared. Entangled in the mesh was a small tin box, edges rounded with rust surface, crusted in barnacles and seaweed. It clattered against the deck, shedding salt water and bits of shell. Jonas crouched, pried it open with a knife. Inside lay a folded scrap of oilcloth, blackened with age, wrapped around something stiff. He peeled it back, a Polaroid photograph, water-warped corners soft. Even through smears of salt and mildew, Lucas could make out faces, 5 men standing on a dock, holding nets and laughing. The image was dated July 1972 in faded pen. Jonas blinked. That's the old fleet, before licensing laws. He squinted at the middle figure, tall, lean, wearing the same pendant Daniel used to wear, a small silver anchor chain, tucked beneath his shirt. "That can't be him," Lucas whispered. He wasn't even 20 then. Jonas shook his head. "Could be family. But look behind them, see that the same hull design as Marina's gift." The detail unsettled them both. Daniel had bought his boat used from a salvage yard in Prince Rupert. He'd never mentioned its past. By midday, they brought the find to Sergeant Thorne. The officer logged the box, noting corrosion consistent with long submersion. He placed the Polaroid in a plastic sleeve, scribbled, "Recovered item number 7 origin, undetermined." Forensics later confirmed the film stock dated to the early 1970s, exposure degraded by seawater. Estimated drift at least 10 years. Could have washed loose from an old wreck, Thorne said. Then, why sealed in a box, Lucas countered. Thorne hesitated. Maybe someone wanted it kept dry. Word of the discovery spread quickly through the harbor. The photograph, though blurred, ignited old memories. Names, half-forgotten rumors from another generation. Some swore they recognized the men as part of the North Wind crew lost in '83. Others insisted it was older, tied to a settlement that vanished after a storm decades back. That night in the tavern, voices rose with the tide. He found something that wasn't his. One man said, "The sea's just taking it back." Another spat into his drink. "No, someone's making sure it stays buried." Marina kept to herself, sitting at the end of the bar, hands clasped around cold tea. When Jonas showed her the photograph, she stared at the middle figure for a long time. "He wore that same pendant," she murmured. "Said it came with the boat. I never saw him take it off." At home, Lucas searched Daniel's things again. The pendant was gone. Only a faint imprint remained in the drawer's dust. In the following days, divers returned to the shoal. Visibility was poor, currents unpredictable. On the second descent, a crewman brushed something smooth beneath the silt. A piece of wood carved with old Haida patterns, splintered at one end, lashed with remnants of rope. They logged it as debris, though Jonas insisted it looked like part of a totemic marker, the kind used to seal ritual sites. The tide shifted as they hauled anchor. Lucas stood at the rail watching bubbles rise where the box had been found. For a moment he thought he saw something below, a pale glimmer spiraling upward, then gone. That night he placed the Polaroid on the kitchen table under lamplight. His mother joined him, eyes tired. "You think it's him," she said softly. "I don't know what to think." Marina studied the image again. "He used to talk about debts. From before I knew him. Said some lines never disappear, they just drift deeper." Lucas traced the torn edge of the photo with one finger. The emulsion flaked off, leaving a thin white scar across the man's face. Outside, the wind shifted, rattling the window panes. Somewhere beyond the harbor, a buoy bell clanged once, twice, then fell silent. On the table, the Polaroid curled slowly inward, as though the sea were reclaiming it even now. In the photo's blur, a familiar face smiled through salt and shadow. The photograph changed everything. It gave the story weight, a face to what had been only absence. But it also opened a door no one seemed eager to walk through. If the man in that Polaroid was Daniel, decades before he was old enough to be there, then the sea had not only taken him, it had sent something back. The following morning, Lucas carried the photo to Jonas's workshop. Spread across the bench were old log books, their pages yellowed and brittle. Jonas flipped through them, muttering dates under his breath. "Look here," he said, tapping an entry from 1983. "June 12th. North wind lost. Coordinates near the West Shoal. Nets found torn, crew missing." Lucas frowned. "That's 16 years before my dad disappeared." Jonas nodded. "A calm day. No storm, no mayday. Just gone. We searched for weeks. Found only lines ripped clean through, not chafed, not cut." "What do you think happened?" The old fisherman leaned back, eyes clouding. "Same thing that took your father." They sat in silence, listening to rain drum the roof. The fog pressed against the window, thick and pale, turning the world outside into a blurred wall of gray. Jonas reached for another ledger, a maintenance book from Marina's gift's previous owner. "Bought her off a salvage yard in Prince Rupert, you said." Lucas nodded. Jonas turned a page, scanning receipts' handwritten notes. Then he froze. "Here, hull refit 1984. Vessel name Prior North Wind 2. The boy stared. "You're saying this was their boat?" "Could be. Numbers match. If that's true, your father sailed a ghost." The realization hit slow cold. If the hull had been raised from wreckage and no record of that recovery existed, then every voyage since carried the weight of the first crew still missing. That afternoon, Lucas brought the ledger to Sergeant Thorne. The officer read it twice, jaw tightening. "I'll check the registry," he said. "But if ownership transferred off books, it might not be in the system." "Why would he buy that boat?" Lucas asked. "Maybe he didn't know." Thorne closed the file. Or maybe he did. Outside, drizzle thickened into steady rain. The tide swelled, high waves slapping the docks with dull rhythm. Marina watched from her kitchen window, arms crossed. She'd always hated the sound of storms when Daniel was late. Now it only reminded her that the sea kept its own counsel. Later, as the wind picked up, Lucas searched the attic for anything linking his father to the photograph. Beneath a chest of oilskins, he found a small wooden box lock rusted through. Inside lay letters, unsent, water-stained. Most were addressed to L.A. in handwriting identical to Daniel's. He unfolded one, dated 1993. "We were wrong to take it. I thought the sea would forgive, but it never forgets. If the others won't come forward, I'll return it myself. When the fog comes, meet me at the line." The letter ended without signature. That night, Lucas brought it to Jonas. The old man read it twice, then leaned forward, voice low. "There was talk years back about a salvage. Something valuable found in the shallows. Tools, maybe gold. No one claimed it, but a few men stopped fishing soon after. Was my father part of it?" Jonas exhaled. He must have been, and maybe he thought he could put it back. The revelation turned the story inside out. The sea mystery was no longer just a disappearance, it was a debt unpaid, a circle unclosed. Meanwhile, in Prince Rupert, a technician analyzed the stain Lucas had found on the torn net. The report arrived days later, organic residue hemoglobin positive. Sample indicates human origin. Age undetermined. Thorne read the line twice, lips pressed tight. He filed the result under pending correlation, unwilling to draw conclusions without a body. Still, the findings spread quickly through the docks, whispered over pints and coiled rope. By the week's end, most boats avoided the West Shoal entirely. Even the younger crews, braver or more foolish, steered wide. Only Lucas seemed drawn closer, circling the coordinates like a moth around a light it couldn't touch. One evening, as he stood on the breakwater, Evan Cross approached, rain dripping from his cap. "You still think he's out there?" Lucas didn't answer. Evan hesitated, then said, "There's something you should see." He led him to his own skiff, tied at the far end of the pier. From the storage hatch, he pulled a folded tarp. Beneath it lay an old net, same make as Daniel's, same tear along the seam. "Where did you get this?" Lucas asked. "Found it tangled in kelp after last week's gale. Thought it was scrap until I saw the mark." He pointed to a faint inscription near the lead line, DA 1983. Lucas felt the world tilt. His father's initials 15 years before he owned any boat, before he was even licensed. He was out there before anyone knew, Evan whispered. Whatever started this, it didn't begin in '99. Back at home, Marina lit a candle beside Daniel's photograph. The flame flickered in the draft, casting shadows across his face. For the first time, she noticed what had always been there, but unspoken, a trace of fear in his eyes, caught just before the shutter closed. Outside, rain softened into mist. From the harbor came the hollow clang of a buoy bell, slow, uneven, echoing like a heartbeat underwater. The net lay coiled on the deck, initials, dark as drowned ink. By early July, the harbor had turned uneasy. Men checked their radios twice before heading out, and more than one boat refused to pass west of the shoal. Word of the human blood on Daniel's torn net spread like oil across calm water. Some said it proved violence. Others whispered it meant sacrifice, a payment the sea had claimed. For Lucas, it only deepened the silence in their home. Marina spoke less with each passing day. She drifted through rooms like a shadow, lighting candles at dusk, staring out of windows long after dark. Lucas knew she'd stopped sleeping. The smell of burned wick clung to her hair. One evening, Evan Cross knocked at their door, hat in hand. He looked uneasy, his eyes darting toward the empty dock. "There's something I didn't tell you," he said. Lucas motioned him in. They sat at the table between coils of rope and old charts spread wide. That night, Evan began the night before he vanished. I saw him down by the pier. Not alone. He was talking with a stranger. Lucas frowned. "What stranger?" "Tall man. Heavy coat. Hood up." Didn't say a word. Daniel handed him a folded paper, maybe a chart. The man shook his head, turned to leave. Then your father said something that stopped him cold. "What was it?" Evan hesitated, eyes distant. He said, "The sea won't take me again." The words hung between them, soft and heavy. "You're sure?" Lucas asked. Evan nodded. Then the stranger dropped a bottle, old glass, dark green. It rolled under the dock. When I went back the next morning, it was gone. What kind of bottle? Looked handmade. But here's the thing I found, one like it yesterday, washed up by the cove. He reached into his coat and placed it on the table, a narrow-necked glass bottle, thick with salt film, faintly tinted green. Scratched along its side was a symbol, a broken anchor. Lucas picked it up carefully. "You think it's the same one, maybe. Or another like it. But look." Evan tilted the neck toward the light. Inside, wedged against the curve, a scrap of twine glimmered, a single thread of Daniel's red mesh. They stared in silence. By morning, Sergeant Thorne had the bottle sealed and labeled Artifact No. 9. He examined the anchor engraving under a magnifier. "Could be a maker's mark," he said. "But I've never seen one split like that." "Means something," Lucas insisted. He drew the same shape on his chart. Thorne raised an eyebrow. "Then find me the chart." But the chart remained missing, its absence louder than any clue. That afternoon, Jonas Wren joined them at the station. He studied the bottle through the plastic sleeve. "You ever hear the story of the trader ghost?" he asked quietly. Thorne sighed. "I've heard plenty of stories. This one's old," Jonas continued. "Before licenses, before radios. They say a man sailed up from the south, trading iron for fish, until a storm took his cargo. He blamed the Haida, said they cursed his anchor. When he drowned, they marked it, broke it in two. Said anyone who fished near his wreck would owe him their catch, or their life. The room fell still. Thorne closed the file. Folklore won't get us a body, Jonas shrugged. Maybe not, but folklore remembers what reports forget. That night, Lucas walked the beach alone. The tide was low sand, rippled with faint channels left by receding water. In the moonlight, bits of driftwood gleamed pale as bones. He followed the line of debris until something sharp pricked his foot, another shard of green glass half buried in the sand. He knelt, brushing it clean. This piece bore no mark, only a thin residue of oil and salt. But as he turned it over, a cold wind swept the beach, carrying a smell of rusted metal and rain. Somewhere offshore, a single light blinked, then vanished. The next morning, Marina woke to find Lucas already gone. He'd taken the skiff and headed for the shoal before dawn. Fog rolled in behind him, sealing the world white. By mid-morning, his radio crackled across Channel 16. Found debris near ridge, marked with static same anchor, then silence. An hour later, the Aurora reached him. Lucas stood at the rail, pale and soaked, holding something in his hands, a piece of weathered wood small as a palm carved with the broken anchor symbol. Around it clung scraps of mesh, Daniel's red line coiled like veins. Jonas took it gently. Where was it? Wedged under rock. Like it had been placed there. Thorne arrived by noon, photographing the piece, noting its clean edges, no signs of breakage. Could have drifted in, he said, but Lucas shook his head. It was buried. Someone put it there. Back at the dock, fishermen gathered as word spread. Some crossed themselves, others turned away. The air smelled of salt and iron. That evening, Marina unlatched the window to let the wind in. From the sill, she watched the horizon fade into mist. Somewhere beyond her husband's last words lingered, "The sea won't take me again." Below, on the kitchen table, the bottle sat sealed in plastic, the red thread inside trembling faintly with the draft. In the bottle's neck, the salt sparkled like an unblinking eye. By mid-July, fog clung to Haida Gwaii like a fever that would not break. The harbor moved slower, fewer boats leaving before dawn, fewer voices calling across the slips. Men avoided eye contact now, afraid that one glance too long might drag the curse nearer. Only Lucas seemed drawn back toward the west shoal, pulled by the silence left in his father's wake. He told no one he planned to dive. The decision came quietly one night as he stood in Daniel's old workshop, surrounded by coiled lines and charts yellowed with damp. On the wall hung his father's mask, cracked plastic lens fogged with salt. Lucas lifted it, felt the weight settle across his palms. If answers waited below, he would find them where the light failed. Evan Cross insisted on joining. "You don't go down there alone," he said, voice tight. "No one dives that ridge without a line back." At first light, they set out aboard Jonas Wren's Aurora. The sea lay flat as slate, a skin of mist, hovering just above the surface. Lucas stared toward the shoal, its position marked only by a ripple where currents met a faint ring, shifting with each breath of wind. Jonas killed the engine at 23 meters depth, same number etched in Daniel's note. They dropped anchor. Its chain, clinking softly, swallowed fast by the dark water. Lucas checked his gear twice, clipped the descent line to his belt, and rolled overboard. The sea closed around him, cold and heavy, a pressure that hummed in his bones. Light thinned to gray ribbons, then dimmed entirely. Below, shapes wavered, kelp silt the ghostly outline of old timbers, half buried in sand. He swept his torch left. There, a frame of wood squared and thick-lashed with corroded metal bands. It looked less like a wreck and more like a monument. Along one beam, faint carvings emerged beneath a film of algae. Haida crestwork, a raven's wing, a coil of tide, an eye, split down the center. Lucas reached for the line, brushing away silt. The beam cracked slightly under pressure, releasing a sigh of trapped air that spiraled upward in slow silver beads. Beneath it, something gleamed, a sliver of metal, triangular, wedged deep. He dug with gloved fingers, prying loose a plaque, no larger than his palm. Letters raised in relief, worn smooth by salt. Kai Gu Ridge Memorial, 1950. The back bore an inscription nearly erased, "To those lost beyond the line." As he turned it over, the current surged. The frame shifted, collapsing part way its weight, dragging at his tether. Lucas kicked hard, sending up a bloom of silt. From the corner of his vision, he saw the net, his father's red mesh snagged across the beam strands, fluttering like torn flags. He reached to free it, but the current twisted again, catching the line. The mesh tightened around his wrist, biting through the glove. For a heartbeat, he froze, staring at the red threads, coiling his arm like veins come alive. Then Evan's grip seized his harness, yanking him backward. The frame gave way with a muffled crack, releasing a cloud of debris that swallowed the light. They surfaced, gasping rain mingling with spray. Jonas hauled them aboard, eyes wide. "What did you see?" Lucas held up the plaque, metal glinting dully. "A memorial. It's been down there for decades." Evan pointed at his wrist. The glove was cut clean through skin nicked beneath. Embedded in the tear, a single fiber of red mesh quivered fresh, not frayed. Jonas stared. "That's not old damage." When they reached the dock, Sergeant Thorne met them with a clipboard and disbelief. "A plaque?" he asked. "Underwater." Lucas handed it over. Thorne wiped the surface with a rag, reading the words aloud. "To those lost beyond the line." "What line?" "The same one he marked on his charts," Lucas said. "The one you keep saying doesn't exist." Thorne frowned. "Could have fallen from an old buoy." "Buoys don't carry memorials," Jonas snapped. That night, Thorne filed his report, but left several boxes unchecked. Origin unknown. Material analysis pending. He placed the plaque beside the bottle in evidence storage, labeling it Artifact Naten. Meanwhile, word spread through town. Some said the plaque proved the sea claimed more than one generation. Others whispered it marked a debt unpaid, a monument not to honor the dead, but to bind them. In Marina's kitchen, Lucas laid the glove on the table. She traced the cut across the palm, eyes narrowing at the red thread embedded in the seam. "Is it his?" she asked softly. He nodded. She looked toward the window where fog pressed against the glass like breath. "Then he was trying to show you." Outside, the wind rose, carrying the low moan of a buoy bell across the bay. Lucas followed the sound to the pier, the glove still in his hand. The tide lapped high, swirling around the posts, whispering against the wood. He leaned over the rail, peering into the dark water. For an instant, he thought he saw the beam again, a square shape carved with wings before the surface folded and erased it. The glove slipped from his hand, drifting downward, the red thread catching moonlight as it sank. From below, bubbles rose slow and steady, like someone still breathing. The next morning, the fog lay so thick over Masset that rooftops vanished into cloud. The harbor seemed suspended in air, boats moored to nothing, gulls crying somewhere far beyond sight. Inside the house, Marina sat at the kitchen table, the plaque from the dive resting before her. Its edges still smelled faintly of salt and iron. She traced the raised letters, "To those lost beyond the line," and whispered, "How many, Daniel?" Lucas joined her, spreading the old charts across the table. They had gone brittle with damp creased by years of folding and refolding. On one, faint pencil marks outlined a triangle between three coordinates. A patch of water, unremarkable to the untrained eye, but when matched to depth charts, it sat atop a submerged ridge. The same place where Daniel had vanished. He turned another page, revealing a copied section of archival charts Jonas had pulled from the local fisheries office. Across the margin, someone decades earlier had scrawled in red pencil, "Kai Gu, restricted after 50. No explanation, no signature. Marina frowned. "That word, Kai Gu, what does it mean?" "It's old Haida," Lucas said. Jonas asked Elder Nas. He said it means the debt place. A chill passed through her. Debt for what? Nas answered that question himself later that afternoon when they climbed the hill to his cedar house. He welcomed them in, motioned toward the fire pit where cedar chips smoldered and smoke curled slow. Long ago, he began our people cast offerings at that ridge. Each family gave something of value, food tools, sometimes even a token carved from bone to keep the tides gentle. One year, a new crew came. Outsiders. They dropped nets over the offerings, pulled them up, and never returned what was taken. Lucas leaned forward. "And what happens if you don't return it?" Nas looked toward the window where fog pressed against the glass. "The sea remembers the weight of every hand that takes. It waits until the tide and name align. Then it calls. Marina's fingers tightened around her shawl. You think my husband was one of them? The elder nodded slowly. Maybe he carried that memory. Maybe he went back to set it right. Outside, the fog thinned briefly, revealing the faint shimmer of the bay. A gull drifted past, its cry swallowed before it reached shore. That evening, Lucas revisited the evidence box in Thorne's office. He studied each artifact, the torn net, the red-stained thread, the bottle with its broken anchor, the plaque from the seabed. Together, they formed a map of gilt pieces of a story his father had never told. Thorne entered quietly. You still think this is about some old ritual? I think it's about a promise, Lucas replied. He wrote it in his letter. I'll return it myself. He wasn't talking about fish or gear. He meant the offering. Thorne sighed, running a hand through his hair. You're chasing ghosts, maybe. But they're the only ones leaving evidence. Later that night, Marina prepared a small bundle, a piece of driftwood carved with a raven, a coil of red mesh, and Daniel's wedding ring. If he meant to return something, let's help him finish, she said. The next day, under a sky pale as ash, they rowed out together, Marina, Lucas, and Jonas. The fog parted just enough to reveal the ridge, the water flat and colorless. Lucas held the bundle over the side, whispered his father's name, and let it slip beneath. It sank without ripple, vanishing into the gray. For a moment, the surface stayed still. Then a current spiraled upward, gentle but deliberate, circling the boat once before fading. Jonas crossed himself, lips moving soundlessly. Back in town, the act stirred quiet talk. Some called it superstition, others said it was closure. But that night, when the fog rolled in again, the bell at the West Buoy rang only once, clear and strong, before falling silent. In the days that followed, small signs appeared along the shore, a glove washed clean, a rope coil neatly folded by the jetty, a silver chain tangled in seaweed. Marina found it at low tide, the anchor pendant still bright beneath a film of salt. She lifted it carefully, eyes wet. He left this behind, she whispered, so we'd know it's done. Yet Lucas couldn't shake what Elder Nas had said, that the sea remembers not just the weight, but the names. If Daniel had returned, the offering had he also offered himself? That question lingered as he stood alone on the pier near dusk fog, gathering around his ankles like smoke. The tide rose higher than usual, lapping the edge of the dock. Beneath the surface, something glinted, perhaps a shell, perhaps metal. He crouched, peering closer, and saw the faint shape of a locket resting on the seabed, its chain coiled tight. He reached for the net pole, dipping it just below the water. But a sudden swell rocked the dock, and the glimmer vanished. Only the ripples remained, widening, slowly fading into calm. When he looked up, the horizon had disappeared again, swallowed by fog. In its place stretched a seamless gray, depthless and soundless. Behind him, the bell at the harbor mouth chimed twice, then stopped. Beneath the mist, the sea breathed like something newly fed. By late July, storms began to gather off Dixon entrance, black squalls with hard rain and thunder that rattled window panes. For 3 nights straight, lightning flared across the bay, each strike reflecting in the harbor like a match over deep glass. Boats stayed moored, their ropes straining in the surge, while the fishermen waited it out in silence, heads bowed over pints and prayers. On the 4th morning after the wind eased, Lucas walked the shoreline with Jonas. The beach was a chaos of kelp and driftwood, torn crab traps, pieces of net tangled with eel grass. The tide had thrown up its wreckage like a confession. They followed the debris line, east boots sinking in wet sand, until Jonas stopped short. Half buried at the high water mark lay a box, wooden small bound, tight with corroded wire. Salt streaked its sides, barnacles clustered in corners, and along the lid someone had carved a broken anchor. Lucas knelt, brushed off sand. It's the same mark, he whispered. They pried it open with a marlin spike. Inside, the contents were arranged with unsettling care. A loop of red mesh coiled neatly around a fragment of chain, a corroded shell casing dark with patina, and a strip of metal etched with faint letters, nearly worn away, north wind. Jonas exhaled slowly. That's the wreck from '83. Lucas lifted the shell casing between gloved fingers. The base still bore a legible code. He didn't recognize it, but Jonas did. That's military issue. Naval surplus. They used them for flares. That wreck, it wasn't empty. By noon, Sergeant Thorne had sealed each item in evidence bags, labeled Artifacts 11 through the 13. He turned the casing in his hand, expression unreadable. "You're sure this came ashore last night?" Lucas nodded. "Right after the storm." "Storms uncover things," Thorne murmured. "They also bury them again." He sent the casing to Prince Rupert for analysis. The reply came 2 days later. Lot traced to Defense Contract 1951. Decommissioned stock. No civilian record. Thorne stared at the paper a long time before tucking it back into the file. At the tavern, the story spread faster than tide. Some swore the sea had finally spat out its debt, disgorging what men should never have touched. Others muttered about a cover-up, a shipment lost, a crew silenced, a ridge seeded with ghosts. The old and the young spoke in half sentences, now afraid to finish their thoughts. Marina avoided the crowd. She spent her evenings on the porch lantern, burning low, watching fog roll over the cove. The anchor pendant hung around her neck again, the chain polished clean. It felt heavier now, as though it carried not memory, but proof. One night Lucas joined her. "You think he found it?" he asked. She didn't look away from the water. "He didn't just find it. He was part of it." He frowned. "Part of what?" "The men who dove there first. Before you were born. They pulled something up they shouldn't have touched. That memorial plate proved it. He told me once he dreamed of hands beneath the net. I thought it was a metaphor. It wasn't." Lucas stared at the tide. Then he went back to finish what they started. Marina nodded. And the sea finished the rest. The next morning, Jonas found Lucas at the dock coiling rope. "You heading out again?" "I need to see it one last time," Lucas said, "before the storm's return." The sky hung low, thick with bruised cloud. They reached the ridge near midday water, a deep green churn. The sonar screen blinked weakly through static. The storm had muddied the signal. Lucas leaned over the rails, scanning the surface. There, he shouted. Floating just beyond the bow was a tangle of netting, Daniel's red mesh unmistakable. Wrapped within it was a small wooden crossbeam. Its ends splintered the center, tied with a strip of oilcloth. They hauled it aboard. The cloth fell open under their hands, revealing another carved symbol. This time not an anchor, but a spiral within a circle, lines etched deep. Beneath it, someone had scrawled initials DAJWLC. Jonas froze. Those were the men from the salvage crew, from the North Wind. Then he wasn't alone, Lucas whispered. Back in town, Thorne matched the initials to old registry records, Daniel Arnaq, Jonas Wren, and Levi Cross Evans' father. The North Wind's manifest confirmed all three aboard the day it disappeared from radar. Jonas paled as he read. That's not possible. We were rescued, pulled from the current. Thorne looked up. By who? Jonas stared at the file voice, trembling. By no one. We woke on the beach, thought we'd drifted off course. The room fell silent. If the ridge had claimed them once, then released them, perhaps Daniel's return was never about guilt. It was about balance. 3 men had taken something. 1 had gone back. That evening, Marina walked the beach alone. Near the tide line, the box's lid had washed loose. In its groove lay a single small object left behind a rusted hook bent nearly straight. She lifted it gently, turning it over in her palm. The metal left a faint stain on her skin, dark as dried blood. She looked toward the horizon where fog bloomed pale against a darkening sea. For the first time since his disappearance, the water lay still, no circling wake, no whispering current. Just silence. But when the wind shifted, it carried a low hum across the bay. Not thunder, not engine, but the faint rasp of rope sliding through unseen hands. On the wet sand, the red mesh twitched once, then stilled. The next morning broke cold, and colorless sky stretched flat as tin. Mist rolled off the harbor in veils trailing around the moored boats like breath. By now, the story of the ridge had spread beyond Masset. Reporters called strangers, sent letters, half condolences, half questions no one wanted to answer. Sergeant Thorne kept his office door shut. He'd written 3 drafts of his final report and signed none. Lucas had stopped sleeping. Every night he dreamed of the dive, the plaque, the shifting beam, the red threads cinching his wrist. He'd wake before dawn, heart pounding, convinced he heard his father's voice somewhere beneath the floorboards, whispering through salt. On the 11th morning after the storm, Jonas arrived at the house carrying a battered satchel. "Found something in the boat's storage bin," he said, setting it on the table. "Didn't notice it before, was wedged behind the fuel drums. Inside lay a leather-bound log, swollen with damp." Lucas opened it carefully. The pages were spotted with salt bloom ink bled to pale gray veins. Near the back, one page stood out fresher, written in Daniel's neat, deliberate hand. "June 13, 1999. The line's still there. The others moved on, but I can't. Not after what we took. The water keeps the count, not us." Every tide whispers the names. Below it, another entry, shorter, jagged. "If the sea won't give it back, I'll carry it down myself." The final words scrawled beneath the margin. "When the water stands still, I'll go." Marina pressed a hand to her mouth. That was the day before. Lucas turned the last page. Pinned to it by rusted staples was a fragment of red mesh folded neat, a strip no longer than a finger. Along one edge, the salt had crystallized into a pale white fringe like frost. Thorne arrived within the hour. He logged the book, bagged the fragment, and took photographs of each page, but he lingered over the final line. "Water stands still," he murmured. "What's that mean?" Jonas answered softly. "It's a Haida saying, when the tide goes slack between flow and ebb, the moment the sea's breath stops." Thorne glanced at the clock. "When was slack tide that day?" 10 a.m., Jonas said, right before the radio call. Silence filled the room. Outside, gulls wheeled over the bay, their cries distant and thin. Lucas stood at the window watching fog peel off the water in long white strips. He imagined his father out there waiting for stillness, the surface smooth enough to mirror the sky, a doorway between worlds. Later in the evidence locker, Thorne compared the fragment to the original net. The weave matched perfectly, thread for thread. But one detail stood out. The newer piece was stained faintly blue as though soaked in pigment. When tested, the residue revealed traces of copper, the same alloy found in the plaque's inscription. He closed the folder without writing a word. That evening, Lucas returned to the dock alone. The tide chart nailed to the post listed the next slack at 9:57 p.m. He sat on the edge boots, hanging over black water, the logbook in his lap. Waves brushed the piling softly, their rhythm slowing with the light. He read the final entry again. "When the water stands still, I'll go." As darkness deepened, the surface calmed, smoothing to glass. The harbor lights flickered against it, trembling once, then steadying. The world seemed to hold its breath. A ripple passed under his feet, small, deliberate. He looked down. In the reflection, something moved, faint red, spiraling upward. Threads of mesh swaying like grass in windless air. He reached toward it, hand hovering just above the surface. The reflection shifted, forming for an instant the outline of a face, eyes open, calm, waiting. Then a gust rippled through, breaking the image apart. Jonas's voice startled him. "Tide's turning." Lucas blinked, pulling back. The water stirred, darkening as current returned. The mesh vanished into the depths. He rose slowly, closing the logbook. He kept his promise. Marina met them at the pier. Without a word, Lucas handed her the book. She opened it to the final page, fingertips tracing the damp ink. Then she closed it, pressing it to her chest. In the distance, the buoy bell rang, one soft, low final. Inside their home, she placed the log beside the anchor pendant, the bottle, and the plaque. 4 pieces each bound by salt, each telling the same quiet story. A man's debt to the sea paid not in gold, but in breath. Outside, rain began to fall slow, steady, washing the docks clean. In the harbor, Marina's gift rocked gently against its rope's hull, reflecting the glow of the lamplight. For the first time since Daniel vanished, the boat faced true north bow, aligned with the ridge as if waiting for orders that would never come. On the open log, the salt bloomed in lines shaped like veins. 20 years passed before the sea spoke again. By 2019, the old fishermen of Masset Bay had thinned to a handful. The harbor itself had changed, fiberglass hulls where cedar once creaked, GPS where instinct had guided. Most who'd known Daniel Arnaq were gone or grey, their memories softened by distance. Yet, when the fog came in thick, they still turned their eyes toward the west shoal where engines idled quieter and birds refused to land. That summer, a research vessel from Vancouver moored at the dock. The crew, marine archaeologists charting historic wrecks, asked the locals for leads. Someone mentioned the stories: the north wind, the circling boat, the ridge that never calmed. Their sonar showed an anomaly there, square and low, half buried under sediment. They called it a survey. The villagers called it disturbance. At dawn, the vessel set out. Lucas stood on shore, arms crossed against the wind. He hadn't left Haida Gwaii. The island had become both anchor and cage. He watched their wake fade into fog, unease rising like tide. Marina stayed home, the house too full of ghosts. By noon, the research team's voices crackled through radio. Faint excitement beneath professionalism. Contact confirmed. Structure timbered, intact keel fragments, possible 20th century build. Then quieter object snagged in debris, netting red fiber. The words froze Lucas where he stood. Red fiber. After all these years, the sea was giving back the last thread. 2 days later, the vessel returned, towing a small section of hull warped and blackened by time. In the cabin lay fragments sealed in clear bags, a length of red mesh hardened with salt. A corroded plaque edge reading Haida Gwaii, and a silver chain wound through the lacing. At its end hung the pendant, the broken anchor still glinting faintly beneath a film of rust. The diver's report was clinical. Recovered remains none. Structural integrity suggests long-term submersion, evidence of collapse consistent with sediment, shift not impact. But one line stood apart: interior void, contained compacted silt, no biological material detected. However, faint impressions resembling rope pattern observed along crossbeam. Lucas read it twice, fingers tracing the paper. Rope pattern. The mesh that had bound his father's wrist on that final day pressed now into timber like a fossil. That evening, he and Marina walked to the memorial overlooking the bay, a simple cedar arch carved with ravens, erected after the inquiry finally closed. Beneath it hung Daniel's photograph, the logbook sealed behind glass, and a strip of the recovered net, stiff and crystalline. Locals had begun calling it the listening place. When the wind turned right, the net whispered, or seemed to. Marina stood silent for a long while, eyes on the horizon. He gave back what he took, she said at last, but it never stopped taking him. Lucas nodded. Or maybe it's been holding him. Keeping balance, she touched the glass palm, leaving a fog print. He always said the sea remembers names. Maybe now it's remembered mercy. Below them, Marina's gift rested in dry dock, its hull stripped for preservation. The paint had faded, but the wood still smelled of brine and oil. On the bow, faint beneath layers of varnish, letters bled through ghost text from an older life, north wind. The island's archivist catalogued every relic. The bottle with the red thread, the plaque from the ridge, the box with the shell casing, the anchor pendant. Together they told a story no official report could fix, a ledger of debt written in salt, paid in silence. As dusk fell, fog slid in low, curling around the headland. The buoy bell tolled once, twice, then steadied, a sound Lucas had come to hear as greeting. He closed his eyes, letting the wind press cool against his face. For a heartbeat, the air smelled of diesel and coffee, of nets drying in morning sun. He could almost see his father at the helm, one hand on the wheel, eyes narrowed toward the horizon, not a ghost, but a man returning to his post. Marina turned toward the path. Come home, Lucas. It's getting dark. He lingered, glancing once more at the red mesh fluttering under the arch. The threads caught the light, trembling as if stirred by an unseen current. Then all at once they stilled. In the silence, the sea seemed vast and patient, neither cruel nor kind, only exact. Every wave a memory, every calm a promise. As they walked back through the mist, the bell rang a final time, deep, resonant, fading slow into night. The torn net hung quiet, a prayer suspended above the tide.